Have you ever wondered what it's like to work as a ranger in a national park? How does one even get that job? What kind of education is required? And what's the day to day work like? Well, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Yellowstone National Park Ranger and my good friend, Cameron Fetter, who will answer all of these questions and more in today's interview. So let's jump into it.
My name is Cameron Fetter. I am currently a seasonal interpretive park ranger in Yellowstone National Park, specifically at the Old Faithful District.
So exciting. And viewers who are watching this may recognize you from videos that we did in Death Valley together. So, do you want to briefly tell them who you are online?
Yeah, so I am most prominent on TikTok. I do also do content on Instagram, a little bit of YouTube. My TikTok handle is the Quake Hub or just my name, Cameron Fetter. My Instagram handle would be seismo_cam. Also just Cameron Fetter as well, if you would like to just search that one up.
Yes, Seismo Cam. Yeah, so you've come on to help me explain some earthquake science before because I don't know any of that.
Yeah.
So that's been really awesome. But yeah, today we're talking about your job with the National Park Service, which is so exciting. I'm so excited for this one. But first, we'll start with what initially inspired you to pursue geoscience and how did that end up leading you to your position now with the National Park?
Yeah, so one thing that I usually tell a lot of people is that my introduction into geoscience was kind of a much different arc than a lot of people have. Oftentimes you hear that people switch majors in college or it's something that they go back to school for because they realize they didn't like their major. I knew that I was very into just geosciences altogether from a very young age. I grew up in a place where there was a creek behind my house and I would go there consistently. I was one of those kids that would just find those coolest rocks that I could find, put them in my mom's purse. I was a very weird kid growing up, but obviously also living in California, a very geologically active place, going to the mountains constantly, basically living with earthquakes. It was just kind of something that always fostered my interest. But as I moved my way through college, I would say about halfway through, so sophomore, junior year, I really started to think that, the Park Service might be something for me. Really kind of embraced that outdoorsy side of myself, tapped into a bit more of my environmental interests as well, just conservation and sustainability, and kind of tying all of these aspects of geoscience together really made me think, hey, being a park ranger would be super, super cool. So it came to my last year of undergraduate just this past May. So I graduated just a few months ago, and I did the National Park Service applications, at least the seasonal positions, back in October. Now, it was a very long waiting period, about 5 months, but come mid-March, got a call from Yellowstone, essentially requesting an interview. So I did the interview, and within a couple of days, they told me that they wanted me at Yellowstone. That was
So
kind of my arc right
exciting.
there.
Wow, that's oh my gosh. I can't imagine what you felt when you got that call.
I was in
Oh,
tears. There was very much tears when I received that call. I just could not believe. Like I knew that people have told me that if you do get an interview, like you're basically there, but to actually receive the call and say, "Hi, we want you at Yellowstone, specifically at Old Faithful," and obviously as a geologist that is very interested in volcanology, just geologic hazards altogether, ending up at Yellowstone, specifically Old Faithful of all places, was just couldn't even wrap my head around it. It was just unbelievable to hear.
oh my gosh. Yes, that's I feel like I'm trying to live through you.
Yes.
So yeah, a very common viewer question was what is a typical day or week like for you working on the job within a national park like Yellowstone? Are you in the field all the time? Do you have office work and what does that look like for you?
So one of the really good things, at least about Yellowstone altogether, is that there is really kind of a nice blend of office work, front desk work, and also being out in the field on what we call roving. So a typical day for me could look like, and I'll just use a rough example because there's like 10 or 12 different set schedules and we all kind of rotate them throughout the week, throughout the season. So an average day for me could be I'll work 8:30 to 6 o'clock. I'll go in and then I'll be given a government vehicle and then I will drive down to, say, Midway Geyser Basin where Grand Prismatic Spring is, rove there for about 2.5 hours, answer questions, enforce safety, point stuff out, just doing a lot of on-the-spot interpretation. And then I'll come back, I'll work the front desk for maybe 2 hours, then I'll have kind of lunchtime and then maybe an hour of office time. This is where I'm kind of checking my government email, working on my formal ranger programs. I do 4 of those, but I feel like we'll probably be talking about those at some point later in the interview. So there's a little bit of office time, and then I'll probably get sent back out on another rove. I'll usually have anywhere between 1 to 2 roves a day. My last rove of the day, I might end up, say, in the rest of the Upper Geyser Basin, which is the basin that Old Faithful was in. So I'll be out there for another 3 hours, going to specific geysers that are set to erupt. Again, more interpretation, enforcing safety, telling people to stay on the boardwalk, staying away from the bison if it comes to it. So that is definitely one thing about this job that is unique. There's a lot of on-the-spot stuff that you will be doing out in the field. If there's a bear, bison, moose, or anything like that, you have to be the one to step in, essentially.
Wow.
So that it's something that you have to be prepared for. But the field, being out in the field is a very, very fun part of this job for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm curious because I've never been to Yellowstone, at least not yet. Theoretically, by the time this video comes out, I will have been, and you will be seeing footage from that trip, but I haven't yet. But I've seen like videos of, I think, the one main road that's out there that's like the big loop, and it's completely stopped traffic. So do you sit in that, or do you get to go around?
I wish I could go around that. So basically the rule of thumb out here is that it is the bison's world and we are just living in it, or pretty much any animal that could be blocking the roadway. But I have been stopped on the road because of a black bear, because of an elk, because of a herd of bison. It's kind of just bound to happen if you are to drive through the park at some point, whether they are on the road. It's just you are going to have to expect to be slowing down at numerous points because people are looking at a bison that's right off the road or a bear that's 2,000 feet away that people are acting like they can somehow magically see. People stop for a lot of stuff here in the park, and it can get very frustrating sometimes.
I can feel attacked. I was just doing a hike where I saw a bear like hundreds of feet away, and I was like I was getting a video, and all you can see in the video is like this tiny little brown dot.
Yeah.
And I'm
that's most bear sightings.
This is a great video.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Before we get into all the rest of the amazing stuff you get to do out there and some experiences you've had, I love on my channel to point out kind of the big why of, why we study geoscience, why we do this research. And so I'm curious, why do you think that it is important that we have geoscientists like yourself working in these parks?
Yeah, I think that having geoscientists working in any park should be the utmost priority because there's so many moving parts to any national park, and especially being at a place like Yellowstone, having geologists or just geoscientists who can understand and really break down that science for just visitors and make what could be a dangerous topic very tangible for somebody is so important. Because here at Yellowstone, we have a number of geologic risks ranging from walking through a thermal area and breaking through the crust, scalding yourself. We actually had an incident like that happened just this past week. We had a 17-year-old boy who went off trail and broke through the crust and got scalded by about 170-degree water. So it's just not a great time. But in addition to just the hazards that already exist, we obviously have the risk of hydrothermal explosions here at Yellowstone, which is probably something I will also be talking about later in this interview. So having people that are there to understand and monitor, especially the Yellowstone volcano, is extremely important. Obviously, not just to understand what the volcano is doing, but just to understand any new hazards that might present themselves in the future.
Yeah. Now that you bring it up, maybe we'll move that part up front in this interview, because I'm sure many people are curious, what are kind of the biggest actual geologic hazards in Yellowstone National Park, and what are some of the ones that aren't there that people might think are there?
Yes. The biggest one that people think are there that absolutely is not is the threat of just any eruption altogether. We are simply nowhere near the threshold that we would need to be at to have any sort of eruption here. The general rule of thumb for the Yellowstone volcano is that we need at least 50 to 60% molten material in the magma chamber that's below the surface to have at least some form of a lava flow, but again, to even just actually reach that threshold altogether. So I think a lot of people just kind of have that natural misconception because they saw a documentary about it and whatnot. But the thing that I tell visitors is when they're like, what is the main risks here? It really is hydrothermal explosions. That is the number one geologic hazard that we have in Yellowstone, just because they are unpredictable. We have no way to know where or when they're going to happen. We can kind of look at a basin and say, hey, this basin is exhibiting signs that Biscuit Basin did before it exploded last summer. But as far as actually finding like that exact trigger point, the timeline for that, it's impossible because obviously we're dealing with pressure building up in an unknown location underground that we can't see or measure. And the second that it releases, it's kind of like, oh, so that was actually happening right there. And then it's a surprise to everybody. Apart from hydrothermal explosions and also emphasizing the lack of a risk of a volcanic eruption here, it's really kind of standard hazards that you would also find in other mountainous areas.
Okay, good to know. And so you kind of already hit on a little bit of this, but is most of your work with rocks, data, park visitors? Who or what do you work with most?
Yeah, I would definitely say that with my position being an interpretive ranger, park visitors is easily the thing that I deal with the most, which I absolutely love. I feel like most people who come through the park, even at a park like Yellowstone, are unbelievably friendly. They definitely look up to rangers quite a lot. They value your time, they value your information, and they value you just being there first and foremost. I would say if I had to put it in order, it would be park visitors, data, rocks. And
Okay.
where data kind of comes into play is where we're doing all the fun stuff with our geyser predictions. So essentially, for our major geysers in the park, we have water temperature loggers and their runoff channels. So whenever we're doing geyser predictions, or if we're looking to see if a geyser has erupted or not, we would look for spikes in our data essentially, and would then use that to make our next predictions. Now, each of our major geysers, they all have different personalities, as we like to say, and some are a little bit more complicated than others. Some it's a little more than just seeing when it started and then just punching it in. It's actually going back and looking at the past several eruptions, because the behavior of past eruptions can play a big role on how we actually do the predictions for the next one. So
Oh.
there is quite a lot to it. I did wish I dealt with rocks a little bit more, but I do get to carry around samples and kind of just show people, like this is what geyserite looks like. Geyserite is literally just the name of the rock that we give to what forms the geyser cones, essentially. Very easy. So I'll carry those around. I'll carry pieces of basaltic lava, rhyolitic lava, just because I'm like, hey, I know a lot about rocks. I can do programs on this and just pull this out and give people an easy visual.
Wow.
But yeah, a little bit of everything. So it really is a multi-layered role.
That is so cool. And you mentioned Old Faithful. We have viewer questions about that. We'll get to that later.
For sure.
But first, as you mentioned, you work a lot with park visitors. So I'm curious, what is the craziest experience you've had so far with a park visitor?
So I would say that the craziest experience I had was actually earlier this week on Monday. So was walking back. I was doing an Upper Geyser Basin Rove. I was walking back from the feature called Morning Glory Pool, which is kind of at the end of the trail in the basin. And while walking back, I see a tour group, and they're all kind of just standing there looking off into the distance, like kind of up the hill at these thermal features. And I look to the right, and there is two visitors that are more than 100 feet off trail, getting within 5 to 10 feet of a thermal feature that is up there. And pulling out my whistle now, and I'm blowing it, and I'm screaming, "Get back on the path right now. You are doing something super dangerous." And they come back, give them a lecture about thermal safety, basically saying, you could have been killed being out there. I'm not even exaggerating.
Wow.
Like, you could easily break through crust and boil to death within just a couple of minutes. It has
Oh my
happened in the
God.
park before. So basically gave them a talking to, and I realized that the two thermal trespassers were with a tour guide. And in my mind, I just was really, really trying to just keep myself under control, because I'm like, you are a tour guide. You are somebody that represents Yellowstone, somebody who should be enforcing safety for your visitors. And you are not only enabling them to do something that is so life-threatening, but also completely illegal. So
Wow.
basically not only having to talk to these two people, but now having to talk to the entire group, but
Wow.
obviously had to pull that tour guide aside and be very stern with him. I'm like, if you do not have what it takes to keep your visitors and your guests under control in a place as dangerous as Yellowstone, you should not be a tour guide. So essentially
Yeah.
what I would do in that situation, and this is basically what I did, is I took a photo of the flag. I got the name of the guide essentially, and I got photos of the people thermal trespassing. I brought them up with my supervisor, and then she essentially forwarded it to a higher manager in the park, and they're more than likely going to have a talk with that company.
So there's other tour guide agencies that like guide people around the park other than just rangers?
Yes. So I would say that most of the tours that we offer in the park are actually not through the National Park Service. They are more so
Oh.
through third parties. But unfortunately, this tour agency specifically has not been the first time that there has been an issue like that around. There has been other occasions, even just this season, where that same tour company essentially allowed people to go outside next to a bear, essentially, which is, again, completely unacceptable. You have to maintain at least 100 yards from predators here in the park.
Yeah.
So just really kind of just like that lack of enforcement. And of course, there's probably a lot of different reasons as to why these tour guides they refused to actually speak up. Unfortunately, a portion of it was probably just because of tips, because if they were to
Mm.
do that, maybe they may not get tipped as much. But there's a lot of different reasons for
Oh,
that. Not
yeah.
going to draw assumptions as to why those specific ones might have done it, but that's kind of just my logical explanation, because I personally, especially as a ranger, could not imagine doing some of the things that I've seen some of these people do.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, if it's keep somebody from getting boiled to death or like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
not.
attacked by an animal, whatever you may have it, it's just
That's crazy. So that's craziest experience. What's the what's do you have like a best or like most inspiring experience with a park visitor?
Absolutely. And I feel like this question is 10 times harder than the last one, because I feel like people, especially looking at rangers in Yellowstone, they think we're dealing with this stuff, just negative experiences every day, which sometimes that is true. We might have a one-off experience every day, 1 week, but I would say that that accounts for maybe less than 1% of all my interactions with visitors. I feel like there's been so many great interactions with people. I've had conversations that have been even as long as an hour with some visitors sometimes, just because
Wow.
they're so interested. They love the park. They want to get as much knowledge as they can. But specifically, whenever I get to have a really positive interaction with kids, especially like swearing in junior rangers, it's always a very rewarding experience when I get to do that. You know, like having the kids come up to the front desk or come up to you in the field be like, I'm working on my junior ranger book right now, and they're all decked out in like their junior ranger gear, like bucket hat, little vest, and they have badges from other parks. It's just like it you can't help but smile. It just makes you so happy knowing that these young kids, they are going to develop such a strong appreciation and love for this place and the field.
Yeah.
There was one kid this week as well. I'm going to be pulling on some experiences just from this week. This week has been a lot. Uh,
Aw.
but there was a kid that came up to me, and he probably was like maybe 6 or 7, and he had a shirt that essentially had every type of volcano on it and a description next to it. And he came up and he was like, "Do you study volcanoes? I want to study volcanoes when I get older." Heart just melted on the spot. And his dad was like, Can you take a photo with you?" And I'm like, "With a shirt this cool? Of course he can." And then of course on the spot I told him, like I also want to be a volcanologist when I get older, like have my bachelor's degree, but would really like to get into the field of volcanology. And his face just lit up. He got so excited.
Oh.
Stuff like that, I feel like happens so much more often than I give credit for. It really makes just waking up every day and going into work that much more worth it. Just really valuing those connections like that.
That's amazing. I bet you've had so many amazing experiences with kids, and that's got to be amazing. Well,
Yep.
I know the visitor that's going to bug you the most in early September will be me. So I'm going to come up to you and say, "Can you tell me about the geology?"
Absolutely.
And then you can talk to me for an hour. Okay, so with the kind of geology of the entire area in mind, is there any active research taking place within the park? And is this kind of like a collaborative effort between universities, scientists, and the National Park Service? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so there is, I guess I kind of have like 3 layers to answer this question. The truth is that because Yellowstone is such a massive park, we have 9 districts and basically 5 or 6 visitor centers in and just outside the park.
Oh my
It
God.
is, it is a whole operation just from district to district. So
Wow.
there is likely so much research going on in the park that I don't even know about.
Yeah.
But I guess just to point out 2 major points of research that are interesting in the environmental science sense and in the geology sense. First and foremost is the ongoing research of Biscuit Basin. There was a webcam that was set up in front of Black Diamond Pool, which is the feature that exploded last July. And since then, there has been 5 recorded explosions just in the past 3 months on that webcam, that we were not
Wow.
able to essentially pick up beforehand, at least with having eyes on it, essentially. So basically, the ongoing research there is trying to determine, what is Black Diamond Pool going to do? Is this going to be a continuously ongoing thing? Or will there be an end in sight, essentially? My friend on the geology team here at Yellowstone could answer that question probably a lot better than I could. But they think that Black Diamond Pool could be entering kind of a new phase where there is still going to be explosive activity, but it's kind of migrating in a sense. Even though Black Diamond Pool is kind of a small feature, there is the most recent explosion kind of migrated more to the northern end of the pool, which was interesting because most of the other explosions had originated kind of from the center and expanded the pool up to the west. But because explosions are now migrating more to the northern end of the pool, it's really begging the question of how much longer are these spontaneous explosions going to be happening? But as far as other research go, this is definitely interesting for a lot of environmental scientists, conservationists out there. But the ongoing monitoring and research of the wolves that we have reintroduced starting in 1995, that is definitely something that is really big interest, not just of scientists, but of a lot of visitors. Everyone comes into the park really hoping that they're going to see at least one wolf while they're here. So just to give some context about that, We reintroduced the wolves in Yellowstone in 1995, and we only had about 20 wolves at that time. But now in 2025, the population has increased sixfold, so we now have about 120 wolves in the park, which is a fairly healthy population, but if we can get it up just a little bit more, that would be phenomenal. But as far as collaborative research goes, especially in regards to the Yellowstone volcano specifically, the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory is a little bit different from your other kind of conventional volcano observatories in the United States. And what I mean by that is that there's really not kind of like a central communication center like you would have at Cascades Volcano Observatory or Alaska Volcano Observatory, both of which I have been, and they have kind of this center communication building. The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory does not have that. It is essentially kind of a conglomerate of ongoing research between the National Park Service, my agency, USGS, the University of Utah, University of Wyoming, and about 4 or 5 other major entities. So there is a lot of moving parts. Each one kind of does its own thing. The University of Utah primarily deals with a lot of seismicity in addition to the USGS. The National Park Service, we do a lot of kind of the on-the-site monitoring just because we're right there. We're front and center. So doing geyser predictions and, even just me writing down Grand Geyser having a shortened interval this day, even though that's small information that may not be necessarily super important, it's still kind of stuff like that that is really working towards understanding these numerous components of the Yellowstone volcano.
God, that's so cool. And this particular interview will be more about your career and potential careers as a ranger, job-wise. But I will be out there doing a Yellowstone or multiple Yellowstone videos around the time that this video comes out. So be on the lookout for that. Cam will probably be in that one too.
Perfect.
And so you did briefly talk about the misconception of the volcano, being on the brink of a major eruption. But are there any other misconceptions or myths about either working as a park ranger, like how that looks to people? Do people not really think it's what it is? Or about the park in general?
At least with the ranger positions, I think that one misconception that people have, at least my position specifically, is that we are on the clock 24/7, that we don't get much rest. We're just constantly out there. That is not the case for my position. If you're a law enforcement / first responder ranger, then it's a bit different. You probably will have night shifts at some point, just because in a place like Yellowstone, it's like in a place that's so big, you need to have somebody with EMS that's kind of just ready to go in a moment's notice if need be. But thankfully for me, I will always work max 9-hour days, anywhere from 7:30 to 5, 11 to 8:30, and then I'll get an 8-hour day thrown in there sometimes, which is nice. Those days usually go by a bit faster. But I definitely think that's one of the bigger misconceptions. But there is a lot of misconceptions when it comes to just Yellowstone altogether. People come into the park thinking that, this is just a one-day trip, like we could do this whole park in one day.
Oh, yeah. I thought that. And then I looked at the map and I was like looking at the drive and I was like, oh, okay.
Like on the map, it looks great. You're like, oh, we'll just
right?
Go to Old Faithful,
go here,
zoom on
and
over up to Mammoth, and it's like, okay, that's an hour and a half of driving just to get between those two places. So you could easily spend, if you really had to do all the roads in the park in one day, you are quite literally looking at about maybe 8 to 9 hours, give or take. But again, depends on wildlife, depends on people, especially wildlife. And the wildlife is biggest variability with traffic in the park, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it's just you kind of have to anticipate that.
God, that's so nuts. I mean, I'm glad it's like a positive thing for me to hear that at least, the wildlife is still so abundant there that it is holding up traffic. I'd rather that than, it be so gone that it's not holding up traffic.
Exactly.
So that makes me happy. But now getting to the part everybody's waiting for, the viewer questions. The most commonly asked viewer questions were related to the current political landscape within the US. And so a lot of viewers were curious, how are the scientific endeavors, or just how is ranger life in general, holding up in this era of large budget cuts to the National Park Service?
That is a very great question, and I will have to be a little careful about how I answer this one too. But at Yellowstone, at least in comparison to other parks, we are very fortunate that the budget cuts have not hit us necessarily as hard as other places. And there are small ways in which you can see that there are budget cuts. For example, we have a backcountry opposite Old Faithful. It is not currently open this season just because there is a lack of staffing. But even though that is maybe like 4 or 5, maybe 6 rangers that would work at the backcountry office, it's still a hit, like people who do want to get backcountry permits and then telling them you got to drive to Grant Village 30 minutes that way or back to West Yellowstone an hour that way to be able to get a backcountry permit. So kind of minor inconveniences is really where it's visible to the public in that sense. But we're very fortunate to have a full staff at Old Faithful. And I think every district in the park, for the most part, was fortunate to begin the season pretty much fully staffed. But I definitely know that there have been other parks that have not been as lucky. One of the cool things is about Yellowstone is that you have a lot of people from other parks that come through at some point. When I got to speak at this one very nice lady from, cannot remember the name of the park. I wanted to say it was Saguaro, but I think it's a national monument in Arizona. They did not have the funding to essentially hire seasonal rangers this season, but they do have 250 volunteers for that location, which obviously, like, at a surface level, it's sad, but then you got to think 250 volunteers at a place where there probably wouldn't have been any staff altogether. It is amazing to hear, because even though obviously this is kind of a scary time with funding for the Park Service and just scientific endeavors altogether, it really gives you kind of that hope that, there are still so many people out there that care, so many people out there that want these parks to continue. They want to keep bringing their families there and just educating themselves, educating their kids. So even though it definitely has been a challenging time, and I'm sure my managers and supervisors could elaborate on this much, much more, given that they're full-time employees there. They're not seasonal like I am. So they have been hit in ways that I cannot even begin to understand myself. But I think in a way, just the fact that everybody is still, at least from my experience, is still just so happy, so uplifting, so happy to be there, just gives the precedent that it's like everybody here really likes what they do to an extent, to quite a big extent, actually. So even though there is obviously a lot of uncertainty with this political climate, it has really been an empowering time. I feel like there's been a lot of positives that have come out of it. I feel like not just with rangers, but just with the general public. There's really been more of that appreciation for the parks and just for our natural lands, which is really kind of the silver lining in all of this, which I really, really have been able to find the positives in.
Oh, that's amazing. I feel like, though, it's been really nice to see that even with all the disagreement, I feel like this is the one thing that we can all come together and say, we love these parks. And that's been really nice to see. I'm really glad that so far, I mean, yes, there's been really big budget cuts, but so far they're still there. And, we have people like you out there helping to keep them beautiful and amazing. So that's good news. And I'm curious too, well, the viewers were curious actually. What are the most critical initiatives currently going on in your office and or at Yellowstone National Park in general? So what are some of the most critical kind of things going on?
I think this time of year is probably fire management. That is one of the biggest things that we are going to be dealing with right now. We had a very low amount of rain that the park would usually experience kind of at the start of June. So back in 2022, when we had those major floods, they happened in June, which is usually the time where we would still have somewhat significant precipitation coming through. And that just did not happen this year. So rivers are running lower. The temperatures are a bit higher, and thus that's translating to just drier forest altogether. So there has been some smaller fires that are burning, but nothing major, nothing like California level wildfires. But there was one this week that got to about 10 to 15 acres. There was a little bit of smoke in the basin, but nothing crazy. That's definitely one of the initiatives that has been going on. Wildlife management is definitely another big one as well. Kind of just ensuring that people are keeping themselves safe, because this time of year right now is what we call the bison rut, which is essentially their mating season, where the male bison get extremely aggressive in herds. So people are encroaching on their space. It could end a lot uglier, a lot faster than it normally would.
Yeah, I saw a video online just the other day of this bison, like essentially throwing this other bison in the air. And I was like, oh my God.
That is exactly what I was going to reference as well. That is a fairly common sight in our big valleys this time of year.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's nuts. I have only seen bison once in person from a very, very far distance, and I cannot wait to see them. But also,
you will see a lot of them.
Hopefully from a good distance and or a vehicle.
Yeah. If you're in a vehicle and they're right outside the road, by all means, get all the photos you want.
Yeah.
Just drive away if he looks like he's getting agitated. They will charge the car if they feel threatened.
Oh my God. Good to know. These are good tips.
Yes.
Oh, and I'm curious too, because you were talking about this current season and, I'll be going up there. So just for my own personal benefit, what is the temperature range? Because I'm from Texas. Now I live in South Carolina. So I'm just used to very, very hot. What is
Yes.
it like in the summer at Yellowstone, though?
So right now, I would say the hottest day that we've had was maybe about mid 80s. But I would say,
Oh.
especially when you come in September, it would probably be high 60s, low 70s. And there's a lot of variability from September into October. October, you can start to see snow, but it even snowed in June here, which was also the weekend that bison fell into Grand Prismatic Spring. So
Oh my
so that so
gosh.
that was so that was a whole thing in itself. But it's generally fairly mild. I would not imagine that people would be necessarily struggling unless we were having a crazy out of the blue heat wave. But I
Oh
haven't
yeah,
seen
no,
it
I
that
was
great.
more worried about it being cold.
Oh yeah,
Because
you
I saw the
usually be just
lows for, I think checked for September. The typical lows were like, I think in like the 40s or 30s. And I was like, that's cold for me.
yeah.
So, I'm bringing my like anything from like shorts to like full on winter gear
Not a bad idea. That's usually what I tell people whenever
just
they're
in
going to
case.
Yellowstone, just in case. You never know.
Well, and we went to Death Valley and, it's in the name, it's Death Valley. So we thought it was going to be much warmer and it was so cold.
Oh my God.
Insert clip
UB
of you
crater?
falling over in the wind.
I could not remember the last time I had been that cold from a wind chill at UB Crater. I was like, this is ridiculous.
Sorry for the tangent. So, the next couple questions are a little bit more on kind of the science of Yellowstone. You've already touched on some of this, but one of you were asked, how is Old Faithful so faithful? And another asked, will the Yellowstone Hot Spot ever cool off?
Yeah, so Old Faithful is so faithful because its plumbing system in the grand scheme of geysers is very simple. It makes so much sense even to somebody who doesn't really have an exposure to just how geysers work altogether. So just to give you a sense of what Old Faithful's plumbing system actually looks like, and we have boards behind the desk that have Old Faithful's plumbing, so I'm used to just pulling it out and being like, that. So basically, there is a chamber that is about 66 feet wide and about 70 feet tall, about 80 feet below the cone. And that is essentially where superheated water and steam will build up in pressure in that roughly 90-minute period before an eruption happens. Now, from there, it'll go up through a narrow vent, and then about 20 feet below Old Faithful's vent on the surface, there is constriction that is the size of your fist. So Old Faithful will expel anywhere from 4,500 gallons to 8,500 gallons within less than 5 minutes. It all has to come through a vent that is this big. So
Wow.
that is the reason that Old Faithful and just geysers altogether shoot as high as they do. Without constriction like that, you don't get that fountaining like you do at Old Faithful and other geysers in Yellowstone and just around the world altogether. But it is stayed so true to its interval for the most part. It has kind of lengthened just a little bit over the past couple of decades. But since, European settlers like first came across Old Faithful, it had that same eruption frequency, give or take,
Wow.
even over 150 years ago, which is truly, truly a marvel of nature.
Lives up to its
So
name.
it does live up to its name, absolutely. So even though there are definitely times where it kind of goes beyond its prediction window, as we call it, and there are sometimes a couple of reasons for that. This week particularly has been quite wonky, not just with Old Faithful, but with other geysers. And right now, our hypothesis is because of the Russia quake. And the reason we say that is
Really?
because we think that because there is such a massive expanse of aquifer systems underneath our geysers here at Yellowstone, that it created a seiche. It has happened before. It's happened with localized earthquakes in Yellowstone. But the farther away you get, it does become slightly less obvious. But there was a geyser that I saw this week that had not been seen erupting since the 80s. I'm not going to make a direct connection to the earthquake itself in Russia, but it's kind of one of those things that you look like and you're like, that's coincidental timing. But then you see Old Faithful doing all this funky stuff, erupting 12 minutes past the window, erupting 25 minutes early. And it's just like, something's going on, but can't put a finger on it, not going to draw conclusions, but I feel like I'm just going to keep going on tangents here. But I'll get to the second part of that question. If the Yellowstone hotspot will ever cool off, right now there is rather ample evidence that suggests that the Yellowstone hotspot already is kind of cooling off. So rather than it being a rejuvenating system like a lot of fear-mongering channels like to claim it is actually more of a system that is kind of slowly dying off. We have not recorded major ground uplifts here in Yellowstone. I think the last time there was a really, really strong signature of ground uplift was back in 2003 but it was associated with kind of a swarm of earthquakes that indicated a lot of hydrothermal fluid movement that was happening underneath the park, essentially. That does happen pretty frequently. This year, particularly, has been pretty subpar as far as just there's not been anything major with earthquakes. I don't even think there's been a noticeable swarm since I've been here, which is usually pretty common in Yellowstone. There has not been any major ground deformation. If anything, it's just widespread ground subsidence for the most part. But with a system like Yellowstone, stuff like that can change very quickly. And like I always say in my videos, it does not mean anything in the grand scheme of volcanic unrest at Yellowstone. When you have a system that is 30 miles long by 45 miles wide and 10 miles thick, that is only 3 miles below the surface, you're going to be having changes like that pretty frequently. It's a very, very dynamic place. Apart from California, it is the second most seismically active place in the lower 48 states. So
I didn't know that.
Stuff should be happening here, essentially.
Wow,
Even if we were having ground uplift or an increase in earthquakes, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just reminding us, yep, we're standing on top of a living, breathing volcano.
Absolutely. And so that brings me to another common viewer question was, what is your favorite geologic feature in the park and why?
That is such a difficult question. I'll just go with geysers just for simplicity's sake. If I had to make a list of my top 5 geysers, Old Faithful would not be on that list. Old Faithful is special for a lot of reasons, but it is not special because of how high it shoots. It is special because of how predictable it is. If we were going just by sheer wow factor with geysers, my favorite would either have to be Beehive Geyser or Grand Geyser, at least of just the ones that I've seen so far. There is one geyser in this park that is called Steamboat Geyser, and it is currently the tallest active geyser in the world. I think we are getting very close to an eruption of Steamboat, and I will be flooring it to Norris Geyser Basin when that happens. But it will shoot water at its highest about 450 feet into the air. For reference, Old Faithful averages about 140 feet.
Oh my gosh.
Old Faithful is not as big as people think it is. It is impressive. Yeah. I will give credit where credit is due, but it is nowhere near the most impressive geyser we have.
Wow, that is so cool. I hope the 400-foot one happens when I'm there.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, at least I have you in my back pocket. You just text me like, hey, this is happening.
Yeah, steamboats erupting.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, the last few questions are going to be kind of student-centered. Well, there's a couple other just fun ones at the end. But first we'll do some advice for students. The first one will be, what was your education training kind of specialization going into this? I mean, we know you're in geoscience, but kind of what degrees you have, what certifications you got, anything like that to be able to do what you do now. And do all ranger positions require a college education?
Yes, so that is a great question. For those who are watching this and are like, I want to be an interpretive ranger, a bachelor's degree is required for this position, but there's a lot of other things that they will look for in your resume as well. What my supervisor has told me, because I had a one-on-one and I was just asking her, what are some of the things you look for when you hire people like myself? And the biggest thing that she said was good science communication ability. That is a big one, especially here in Yellowstone, and good customer service as well. Those are kind of the two major things that a lot of hiring managers will look for. So kind of your interpretive ability, your ability to deal with stress tolerance, especially at a place like Old Faithful. You definitely do need to have a lot of stress tolerance and be ready to have a lot of things thrown at you.
Yeah.
Just like having things like a crying child come up to you and just like dealing with somebody that's emotional. And then you have somebody come up right afterwards and they're like, hi, we have a missing party. We haven't seen them in an hour and we last saw them about 2 miles away from here. So there's a lot of stuff that can get thrown at you on the spot. So that is kind of an extreme example, I will say, but it does happen. So in addition to science communication and customer service, just being ready to kind of have anything like that thrown at you. And could you remind me what the other parts of that question were again?
Oh yeah, the other part to that would be, you have your bachelor's degree in geology, but can you do other STEM fields? Can you do non-STEM and still go into this?
Absolutely. So just to give you a sense of the diversity that we have here at Yellowstone, there is only 2 rangers, myself included, that actually have a background that is specifically in geology. So needless to say, if people have volcano or earthquake related questions at the front desk, they always get directed over to me, essentially. But we have people on our team that have major also in environmental science, sustainability, conservation, hospitality management even. One of my coworkers was a high school math teacher. We have an entomologist, so we have a bug person at Old Faithful, essentially. There's so many different backgrounds that you can take to get into a ranger position. Obviously, some will be a little bit more specific depending on where you go. But here at Old Faithful, I feel like there is such a melting pot of backgrounds that it's like you truly can major in any natural science or just anything that deals with people, teaching, and whatever, and you would have just as good of a chance as anybody else.
Absolutely. And then a lot of other, I assume, students asked, are there internship opportunities at these parks? And one viewer specifically asked, are there opportunities for international students to do internships or, full-on positions at these parks?
That is a great question. So there is a lot of ways that people can get involved, especially if they are still students, because obviously, like I said, to be an interpretive ranger like my position, you do need to have that bachelor's degree. But thankfully, there is a lot of ways that students can get involved. International students as well. One of the best internships, arguably the best internship program that you can get with the National Park Service would be the Scientists in Parks program. Some of you watching this might probably know a thing or two about those programs. The Volunteer in Parks program is another big way that people get their foot into the door before they have their college degree. So one of my friends at Old Faithful is actually a volunteer. She's going into her third year of undergrad. Essentially, for her volunteer program, she just gets sent out to kind of rove the basin, kind of like I do, and just enforcing safety, answering questions and whatnot. So basically doing a minimalistic version of my position, essentially, like being able to go out and do the fun stuff, but not having to be in the office, answering emails and answering questions at the desk and whatnot. For any park, that is an amazing way to get involved. But of course, it definitely is that time commitment without getting paid. But if you really want to get a foot in the door, it is a spectacular route to go.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. That's really cool. And before you even get the degree, that's awesome. And then there was another viewer wondering, how accessible is this job to those with disabilities? Are there ranger positions that maybe can just be in the office for somebody that might have a physical disability?
So my general experience, it is very, very friendly for disability accommodations. So last year there was actually an interpretive ranger that was in a wheelchair, but was still able to do programs and whatnot. There might have probably been some limitations with roving and whatnot, but one of my coworkers this year, she actually has a service dog that just runs around the office whenever she's there. So again, very disability friendly, and also very friendly if you have, say, a service animal. It makes life in the office much more fun when you're up there. From experience, it's amazing just answering emails and you're like, I'm bored, I'm gonna go kick the ball for Toby real quick.
Oh, that is so cool. I didn't know that, because you figure there has to be a lot of field work, but it's a diverse effort of a lot of different things coming together. So it's good to know there's other opportunities that might be more accessible to those that can't go out there in the field all that much.
Absolutely.
So that's really
One
cool.
thing I will also point out as well is that there's no such thing as like a specific age range. I mean, obviously you have to have that bachelor's degree, but there is such a wide age range in our staffing at Old Faithful. So it kind of runs from me kind of on the baby end of the spectrum, being early 20s, and then you have some of my coworkers that are up to all the way to their mid 70s, but they just keep coming back because they love the work, they love doing it. So it really kind of fosters this unbelievably diverse environment, not just in terms of backgrounds, but just overall ages. But we all learn something from each other, and I think that is, once again, really just kind of the beauty of this position.
That is so amazing. And another question was, what is the employment longevity for park rangers? And could this be like a whole career? Are there opportunities for moving up or promotion? Is this like full time? How does the seasonality work with it? How does all that work?
Absolutely. So if you are a seasonal ranger, the season will typically last about 4, sometimes 5 months. My season is going to last a little bit closer to 5 months just because I opted for an extension and I was fortunate enough to receive one. But permanent positions, as the name suggests, you are there pretty much year round. But the workforce during the winter time in Yellowstone is severely cut. So there is only going to be about 4 to 5 permanent staff in the winter just because there's not that much demand. There's not many people coming into the park unless they're coming in on snowmobiles or they're with a snow tour, essentially. But permanent positions are definitely much harder to come by in the Park Service. But if you are able to get your foot in the door and to get a seasonal position, then it's really kind of just building your way up, essentially. So if I come back for another season, then that would mean that I would be eligible for a higher pay grade if I were to come back for a third season. So kind of like the government pay scale is based on GS05. So that's my pay grade, for example. But if I were to come back, say, in like 2 or 3 years again, I would probably be moved up to a GS07, which is a higher pay rate, essentially.
Okay. And like you were telling me beforehand, you have this 5-ish month season, and then you could come back next year. And that is something you don't have to apply for? You just kind of get asked to come back. Is that how that works?
Generally, yes. And this is also something I'm trying to figure out. So as long as I do not work more than 1,039 hours for specifically the park ranger position, and this is transferable from parks as well. So if I were to say be a park ranger at Joshua Tree under the exact same title, I can still not go past that 1,039 hours. So I would only be able to work there for a short period of time. So generally, if I don't go beyond that 1,039 hour threshold, then I most likely will get asked to come back, and this is what we would call a non-competitive rehire, essentially, which would definitely be most ideal. Of course, even if I were to go beyond that 1,039 hour, hypothetically, and I would have to submit that application again, more than likely it would still be my same supervisors, the same hiring managers that would see that, and they would say, oh, Yellowstone this season, bump them up higher on the list, essentially, just because we know who they are, we know what they did, and we know they did a good job, hypothetically.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds really cool. I didn't know how the seasonality of it all worked. So that's super interesting, but I hope you get to go back because
me too.
I know you're probably doing amazing out there. So for students majoring in geoscience, somebody was wondering, what's the most important lesson that you've learned on the job?
Most important lesson I've learned on the job. This is a hard one because I feel like there's so many good lessons that you can learn on the job. And a lot of that I feel like is learning specifically how to deal with the public, especially in a place that is very geologically active and can be very dangerous.
That's what I was, I think, surprised about during this conversation is I mean, like you said, the most important things when looking at applications are, science communication and customer service, which I feel like, I mean, one, perfectly describes you, but I think two, like those are qualities that like I have, for example, but I don't know if I would trust my ability, for example, like in the situation you were in where you had to call people from being off path back to the path and have to do that right away. Like, I don't know if I could really like manage people like that. That's a skill.
Yeah, it's just, I think that is my one thing. If people were to ask me, what's your advice coming into a new park ranger job, especially working at a place that can get as busy as Yellowstone, when I kind of touched on this earlier, is that you have to be ready for literally anything.
Yeah.
Whether you're just walking down thinking it's a chill day and then suddenly you see someone that's getting charged by a bear or a bison or something like that. Being able to not only step in if it's safe enough, but being able to pull out a radio and just calling law enforcement on the spot to get someone out there, because it's just, it is so dynamic. Most of the time you will not be thrown into a situation just that violently, that on the spot, essentially. Yeah. But, as some of my coworkers experienced last year, like walking back to their car at Biscuit Basin and then hearing screaming and running behind you, and you turn around and then there's a 600-foot tall plume from a hydrothermal explosion. It's like, obviously that's kind of a rare occasion, but being ready for potentially something like that to happen and just stepping in to keep people safe more than anything is definitely something that you have to be aware of. And obviously hazards will change from park to park, but even though your job mostly is with education, you do kind of have to have like that first responder mindset in your mind as well.
Well, and it's something, again, like you mentioned earlier, we know a lot about the geology of this area, but we also know that there's a lot that cannot be predicted. And that's not just going to change. These things, we don't know when they're going to happen. So yeah, it's really just, you have to have that really fast acting mind and be able to think on the spot, which is not for everyone. I'm a very planned out, thought it through person. I don't know if I could do that. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, a big lesson that, people who might want to do this should think about. Obviously for different parks, it would be different. Not every park has those, imminent danger type situations. But the last couple questions that I always love to ask my guests for this podcast are, what is your least favorite part of the job and what is your favorite?
Oh gosh. Favorite part of the job, there's a lot of different things I could say for that. I think my favorite part is, just being able to get paid to just walk around and check out geysers, essentially. I'm obviously being out there and educating the public. So if my supervisor is watching this, they're like, "You're not educating people out there." I am. I very much am.
But you have a love for that too. So
I do have a love for that as well. But just being able to just work where I do and just being able to be in a position where I can impact people's visits, kind of make or break that experience, like after doing a guided tour of Geyser Hill, which is one of my formal programs, and having people come up to me or come up to the desk and be like, this was the highlight of my day. He was so amazing. We had such an amazing time. That is really like just the comments that really like make waking up every single day just awesome, you know, like not waking up and being like, oh, I have to go to work. It's waking up and being like, today's going to be a great day. It's going to be a day full of opportunity, and don't know what's going to happen, which for some people that's an element of fear, but for me that's just something that I try and take advantage of if I can.
That's something I've noticed through a lot of these interviews is there are some careers where clearly, you know, it's a very routine thing every day. And for some people, they thrive in that kind of scenario. And then a lot of these jobs, it's very much switched up every day and you don't know what to expect, but that's why they love it. And that's what I'm hearing from this. I feel like it's very dynamic, and that sounds really exciting, to be honest. It sounds really cool.
Yeah. So it's just there's so many things that I love about just day-to-day life on the job, whether it's swearing in junior rangers and just seeing the look on their faces and just smiles all around whenever we swear in junior rangers. So obviously they'll give us their book, we'll look through it, ask them some questions about their visit, ask them what type of ranger they would want to be. But then at the end, this is what I do when I swear in junior rangers, but I would ask them, okay, we have one of two options for you to complete your junior ranger program. We could either do the classic pledge on the back of the book, where you raise your favorite hand and you repeat after me, or we could do the Ranger Cameron way and we can do an Old Faithful handshake. And what I would have them do for that handshake is I was like, we'll do 2 fist bumps back to back. The first fist bump will do a little hot screen sizzle, so we'll do like a and then the second fist bump we'll make a geyser and go.
Oh my gosh.
The smiles on their faces. It's so great. I love doing it so much.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I hear you talk about it. I can tell how much you love it. And do you have a least favorite part, or does that not exist? Is it the park visitors that go off path?
That would probably be my least favorite part. Just the visitors that blatantly disobey rules is definitely the most frustrating part. But I feel like most of the time, even when I do catch somebody doing something, like somebody wanders like a few feet off the path towards a hot spring, but there's kind of like an inconspicuous sign, I'll blow my whistle if I'm far away, or I'll come over there and I'll be like, sir, you are wandering into a thermal area. That is extremely dangerous. Almost every single time they're like, so sorry, did not mean to do that.
Yeah.
Most of the time I feel like people are very understanding and they're apologetic.
Yeah.
So finding a least favorite portion of it is definitely kind of difficult.
Well, that's good to hear. Good to hear, especially for potential students watching this that might want to get involved, or non-students, whoever you may be.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
If you want to get involved with the Park Service, it sounds like it's a really amazing place to be. I know I'm incredibly jealous, but also just so happy to see you out there doing that. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. Any other last words you want to say, or, you know, you said it all pretty much?
If there are those of you watching this that absolutely know that you want to apply and be a ranger, do not be discouraged by people that tell you it is a competitive field, because it very much is, but that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that just because you may not think you have as much experience does not mean that you are less qualified than other people. Just because you didn't get those volunteer hours in the park does not mean that you are going to be exempt from being considered from a position like this. I did my applications without any experience with the National Park Service or with any federal service altogether. So just apply. Apply whenever you get the chance. It is so worth it, and it is definitely something that is going to be rewarding in the long run, both personally and professionally.
That's a good one to end on. But again, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. And yeah, those of you watching, I will link some resources down below if you want to look further into the National Park Service, the scientists in the park, you know, internship opportunities. And other than that, you can also probably catch Cam on some of my other Yellowstone videos that I will be doing on my trip and in and around Yellowstone and some other areas around there. So keep an eye out for those videos. And yeah, thank you again, Cam.
Thank you. It was really fun to do this, Rachel.